Good afternoon. Welcome to Potomac Valley Fly Fishers Fly of the Month, our beginners program. So today we're going to be tying another type of fly, and it is commonly referred to as a rabbit strip leech. Now, we haven't tied a leech before. However, one might think that perhaps the woolly bugger is an imitation of a leech, and in fact, it probably is. But a woolly bugger uses different materials than the rabbit strip leech. In fact, the name itself connotes that what we're going to be using is a strip of rabbit fur. And there are many different versions of the rabbit strip leech one can find just simply by going on the internet and looking up that term. I'm going to be showing how I tie two versions of the rabbit strip leech, which I like. And in both patterns, we're using two forms of the rabbit skin or rabbit hide. One is referred to commonly as a zonker strip, in which the fibers are running parallel to the cut of the hide itself. And the other is commonly referred to as crosscut, in which case the fur or the hair is standing out basically at 90 degrees from the direction of the hide itself. And as I proceed through this instruction, perhaps you'll see the advantage of using both the zonker strip as well as the crosscut. Now, that's not saying that you have to use that. There are other manners or other rabbit strip leeches that you can do that just simply use all zonker strips, and some that have the abdomen of the fly, or what would be the sort of the belly of the leech or the minnow, can be something else like hackle or dubbing or something like that. But I like this pattern because it's simple to tie. You can tie it in various forms and various colors. And at the end of our presentation, I'll talk a little bit about how to fish it and about the color and size and things like that. So we're going to get started. And the first one I'm going to be tying is what I would refer to as my conventional rabbit strip leech, which has a little bit of crystal flash at the head of the fly to give just a little bit of sparkle to this leech, because leeches are rather drab in color. They commonly occur sort of purplish, a dark brown, maybe olive, something like that, probably depending upon the environment of the stream or the pond or lake that they live in. So let's get started. So I have already placed a cone head on this size 6 streamer hook, and now placing it in my vise. I can often tie this fly with a bead head rather than a cone. However, a cone is my favorite. It provides a lot more sort of glistening to the head of the fly. I find it to be a little bit more streamlined than what a bead looks like, but I'm sure that it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference to the fish. Most of the times I will use nickel or silver for my cone heads. The next thing I'm going to be doing is providing a little bit of lead or lead substitute on the shank of the hook, butting up underneath the cone itself. That is going to provide a little bit more weight to the head of the fly, so as we're stripping it. And these leech patterns are not meant to be stripped fast, much like you would a woolly bugger, because leeches don't swim that fast. So they more undulate, move their bodies sort of slowly through the water to move forward or against the current, whatever. And so we want our fly to behave like that when we are fishing it. So I will take this lead wire starting about mid-shank and make about 6 or 8 wraps. About there. And then I can helicopter it to trim it off, push it up underneath the bead or the cone head itself, Make a few more wraps around the shank of the hook. So again, forcing it in place. And I like to use my small wire snips to trim off that extra piece. I find that to be a little bit easier than helicoptering a very small piece. And then I often will pinch that down, so securing it all in place. And now I'm going to start my thread immediately behind that lead, creating sort of a dam to keep the lead from moving towards the back of the hook. Building up a little bit of I refer to it as a dam. Making several thread wraps to the back, clipping off that excess piece, and then wrap forward, this time going up onto the lead itself, which also secures it in place and keeps it from turning. If this were another type of fly, you would need to be concerned about that lead turning on, but in this particular case, it's not that important. But nevertheless, we want to secure that lead in place so it doesn't slide backwards. All right, now I am wrapping the thread back to the bend of the hook, stopping just about above the barb of the hook itself. Now I pre-selected a piece of the zonker strip. Again, the zonker strip referring to the fibers, as you can see here, are going in the same direction, sort of parallel to the strip itself, the leather strip. I've also cut a point on this rabbit strip, this zonker strip, and cleaned off some of the hair that would be right there, just about where we're going to be tying this in. Now I had already prepared this strip, judging that about 1.5 hook lengths of the tail would extend beyond the rear of the fly. I'm going to hold that immediately on top of the shank of the hook with my left hand and make a number of thread wraps. Notice that first wrap is a loose wrap and I tug down. The next one is loose and I tug down. We want that rabbit strip not to spin around the shank of the hook, but actually ride right up on top. So, some more thread wraps to secure that definitely in place. Now, some folks may decide that they want to be sure that that doesn't move, so it doesn't hurt to take a little drop of super glue, just put it on there, and that's going to hold that even firmer in place. The next thing I am going to do is select the crosscut. And if you notice in this piece that I'm holding up, the fibers are perpendicular to the strip itself as compared with the zonker where they are parallel to the strip itself. And I have selected this so that when I tie in this tip back at this point, the fibers will be extending to the rear as I continue to wrap this crosscut section of the hide forward. So note that I have the little point on the tip of that crosscut piece. I'm laying it right on top and I'm securing it again with several thread wraps, tying it down quite tight. Now I can just let that dangle for the hang down for a few seconds until I've wrapped the thread forward until we get right behind the cone. All right. Now, I will begin to wrap this crosscut piece forward with each turn pulling back the fibers, and each turn of the hide is going to butt right up against the previous turn. And as I have probably mentioned at the beginning of this session, I like using both the zonker and the crosscut because the hair behaves in such a nice way that you get a nice streamlined leech with a lot of movement in it. Several more wraps, and we'll be finishing this portion off. Okay, I pretty much have the rabbit right where I want it. I'm going to be making one more partial wrap, bringing my thread right behind that strip, pulling down. And when I'm pulling down on the thread, it's actually pulling the hide underneath the cone itself. A few more wraps immediately behind, and then several wraps in front, locking that down. And then I trim this off as close as I can. Make a few more thread wraps. Just pull all of that down in place. Now, this fly is very close to being finished because the only other step will be to take several pieces of crystal flash, and this particular pack is referred to as graphite. I like to use silver, mylar type of crystal flash for my flies. So what I'm going to be doing is picking the center section, in other words, midway between the two ends, and wrapping the thread at that point over the strands to lock in strands on my side, which is not obvious from the camera angle, but you'll see it on the other side. I'm holding this rear part of the chenille or the crystal flash along the side of the fly, securing it with several wraps, and then pulling the other forward portion to the opposite side and securing it in place with several thread wraps. Okay. And now we're just going to secure this with several whip finishes. Clip that off. It doesn't hurt to put a few drops of cement right down there behind the head of the fly. And now I'm going to cut these fibers off so that they are no longer than the tail itself. We don't want that flash to be beyond the tail. So trim it off on that side, trim it off on this side, and there we have it. Now, if I were to wet this down, it's going to look quite a bit like this one that I tied earlier. All right, so this will be the second version of this fly. I've already put a cone head on and tied in or secured some of the lead wire. Now I'm going to secure that with several thread wraps, make sure that it doesn't move forward on me. And a few more thread wraps to the rear of the fly. Trimming off the excess thread. The next thing I will be doing is putting in a piece of this crystal-like material. It doesn't have to be this, it could be dubbing, but you want something that's going to give some sparkle yarn, something like that would be fine. So this particular material that I've picked is referred to as metallic needle point yarn. So if you ever wanted to buy something like this, go to Joann Fabric or one of the other craft shops, and you'll be surprised how much fly tying material you can find there. So what I'm going to be doing is securing this particular material first right behind where I had tied in the lead, and then making several wraps of this material back to the bend of the hook, and now a few very broad wraps of the thread just to secure that all in place, stopping right about where the bend of the hook starts. That's where we're going to secure the tail of this fly, and then clipping this off. So I now have that as sort of an abdomen. The underside of the fly is going to have a little bit of sparkle and it's secured in place. I'm next going to take a section of the rabbit zonker strip and measure this. I want this to go just about from where I stopped the lead wraps back to about 1.5 lengths of hook behind that. And I'm cutting this at an angle so that this zonker strip has a sort of a point to it. Now, I'm putting this in place again, so I want that zonker strip to stop, just about the point where the lead is. And then I lift this up and pull these fibers forward. And it also probably would help to just put a drop of cement along the top of this material. It's going to give the zonker strip something to attach to. I set that up on top. And make a couple thread wraps, again pulling down tight. A couple more right at that point. Now, notice the next thing I do. I'm not going to be wrapping my thread over the top of this forward section, but in fact, I'm going to be just moving the thread forward underneath it till I get to this point where the lead had stopped, and then I can tie down that very tip on top. So, still providing a nice silhouette for this fly and keeping that rabbit strip up on top and not underneath. Okay, so we're at that point now. And so we need to again take a little bit of the crosscut material. Again, pointing out to you that the crosscut, the fibers are sticking perpendicular to the hide. Creating a little point at the very tip of this. It's going to help me tie that in. Laying it right up on top. Several more thread wraps. And then wrapping the crosscut much the same way as we did before. And that would be with each turn, you're stroking back the fibers. And we're going to get about maybe 3 wraps of hide right there before we secure it. As I pull it down, it sort of tucks that hide right underneath the cone head, and then 1 or 2 wraps forward of that. Oops. Didn't have that hook in there very well. Clipping this off. I'm using my fingernail to tuck that in underneath that cone. A few more wraps and a whip finish. And a fly is just about finished. A little drop of head cement down in there to hold everything together. And we have finished the second version of the Rabbit Strip Leech. Okay. Well, I'm actually holding up the two patterns that we tied today. The very first one that has the crystal flash up around the collar, and the other one which has the on the underside is that piece of crystal type of material. As I said before, this could be dubbing, that sparkle dubbing of some sort, or it could be foil or whatever, just to give the underside of this leech a little bit of flash to it. Now, perhaps we should talk for a few minutes about how to fish this leech. I already mentioned that we want to strip it slowly, or let it actually hang in the current if you're fishing in a stream. Wiggle or twitch the end of the rod so it's going to impart some movement. But remember, a slow retrieve, because leeches do not swim that fast. They don't swim like a minnow. Cast them upstream, let the current carry it down, and then let it sort of sink to the bottom, pick it up, undulate the end of your rod so that it looks like this leech is trying to move forward. It's important also to have the leech weighted, because after all, leeches are creatures that move along the bottom of a stream or a pond or something like that. And so they just kind of meander along. So I think the principle in fishing with a leech pattern is to impart that natural type of movement that the leech is going to use as it moves around throughout its habitat. So I've given you two versions of this particular rabbit strip leech that I like. As I mentioned earlier, there are probably a dozen other patterns on the internet. All of us have our favorites, and this is mine. I hope that you have a good time tying this, and I wish you success with it. And if I haven't mentioned it before, when you're picking the color for this leech, again, think of the environment that you're going to be fishing in. If it's a pond which has sort of brown types of, the bottom on is brown, or the foliage in that is a dark green, that's what you want to pick. My favorite is to use purple, because when I'm fishing in Canada, for example, the lake habitat that I'm in doesn't necessarily have purple plants, but I think that this particular fly fits in very well with some of the natural forms of leech that occur in some of those Canadian lakes. So, wishing you well and tight lines.